One, I hope what we've talked about so far has taken you into some research that has led you to a story in the Bible that you've never heard before. It is the story of the Bible, but the way it's been portrayed, and you're given every opportunity to not read the Bible in this society. Instead, we'll just tell you the stories the way we interpret them. We'll give you TV shows and movies and talk about it in your Sunday school, so you don't actually have to read it, you know. It's kind of the idea, I think. But beyond that, you know, if you have done some research because of these videos, or even before, you've discovered a whole new world, and you've discovered the world possibly of the Essenes. And if you don't know who the Essenes are, okay, if you don't know who the Essenes are, then I would definitely find out. They are definitely who John the Baptist was leading, and or some descendants of that, you know, tribe, or call it a cult or religious sect, if you will. That's definitely what John the Baptist was a leader of. And considering, if you believe in Jesus Christ, that Jesus Christ considered John the Baptist the greatest of anyone on this earth, even himself, and asked for John the Baptist to baptize him, then you better find out who the Essenes are and what the heck they're doing, right? You're also finding out that there's a lot of things in this Old Testament that are prescriptions for life that have nothing to do with the Ten Commandments. That there's that there's live forever diets prescribed in the Bible that have nothing to do with kosher law, for example, even in the Old Testament. You may even be discovering that the Essenes and the earliest believers of Christ and the earliest Christians were divinators and astrologists, and they believed in trying to put their mental states into states that got them away from their material lifestyle, from the life in their body, from wanting things of this world all the time, and being, you know, moving from thought to thought to thought, existing for the things of this world. And they did that in many ways, and this is where we get our traditions of divinations, like tarot reading, rolling dice, casting lots. This is also where we get our psychedelic usage. When early Christians were using cannabis, were using other types of medicinal plants to find altered states. And when I say altered states, I'm not saying that they were looking to seek hallucination per se, but to find the understanding that comes with these medicinal plants. One of them being something like, maybe you don't know this, bay leaf, for example. Bay leaf is incredibly psychedelic. You can boil it and just have the steam come up. You'll be amazed. You can go from just drowsy to an incredibly euphoric experience. There's all kinds of things besides cannabis, LSD, mushrooms, things of that nature. So their point was to put themselves in a state that allowed them to see their lives outside of the carnal realities that were constantly pulling on them. Because when you're within the normal state, you're constantly pulled by desire, by hunger, by earthly desires, by earthly needs. And you can actually kind of step out of those and sort of see maybe a spiritual understanding of things, or a spiritual experience through that type of medicinal plant. So, I'll give you an example. Many people don't know this, but the AAA, the Alcoholics Anonymous, its methodology has changed tremendously from its beginning philosopher. The creator that it all stems from, one of his desires, or one of his prescriptions to getting off of alcoholism, was taking MDMA, was taking either LSD or ecstasy. Reason being is when you're on mild doses of those, or even heavy doses, but it's easier to deal with if you're on mild doses, you step out of that alcoholistic state. You don't need alcohol at that point. And then you're able to sort of really objectively not only look at your life, but it also gives your life this incredible depth to be able to see past, well, I'm hungry, and some of the things that kind of could really fill up your mind. And it would happen instantly. People would do one dose, one night's worth of tripping, and they would be off alcoholism the next day and be very reverent and sorry, obviously, because they could see the damage that it had done to their life. And so that's sort of the spiritual uplifting that can happen when used correctly, when you're using these types of medicinal plants for a good purpose, if you will, for the right purpose, maybe. Okay. So, I'm smoking for that purpose. Now, we talked about the immoral nature of Exodus God, of the God in Exodus. And so, in summation, we're talking about that Jesus basically comes, and if you look in Matthew, when he's talking to the highest, and they're not even Jews, but the highest Jewish order at that time, the highest Moses descendants, priesthood at that time, the highest priests, the highest rabbis, the rabbinical order at that time. And he looks them right in the eye and he makes it very, very clear that they are praying to a different God than his Father. And thus, the law that comes down forth from Moses is a law that is hard on Jesus' people, on us. That the law is hard because law is where condemnation comes from. You cannot have any condemnation if there is no law. Okay? And so the law is not only hard on our people and causes death on our people, but that there is an actual other being, other consciousness that Moses' people are bowing, that the Jews have been, taken by, and that they are prescribing to through their carnal natures and carnal desires. And he is showing them a different light, a new covenant, a new way of eternal being. And so he says, makes very clear that no one on this planet has ever seen his Father or heard his word. And thus that would take away any idea of anyone that is talking to God in the Old Testament is actually talking to the Father of Jesus Christ. And so that's where the salvation is in the story. What you have in the story is some sort of being with supernatural powers, a god, a lesser god, possibly a fallen angel, whatever that means, that felt inclined or was given the Jewish people. He was a wrathful, vengeful, and in his words, jealous God. And he would kill you and looks to kill you if you don't pay him the proper allegiance. But you were saved from him and never have to fear him again because of the salvation of Christ. That salvation came through the price. There were shekels actually paid. And then the body of Christ itself. To free you, this is the story, that we are all descendants of these 12 tribes eventually. And thus, if not all of us, whichever one of us are under bondage, no longer have to be under this carnal bondage. And that could even mean, even under the physical consequences of death that should await you on this earth, no longer need to await you on this earth, should you take on this new prescription of life given by Jesus Christ. That's the story. Okay? That's the story. The story is the Old Testament. The first story is about people, the Jews, coming under bondage into this raging, wrathful, vengeful God, doing all these crazy, daring, spiteful, bloody things. And then causing us to be bloody, spitey, as Hume would say, small British creatures. And then Christ bringing a new consciousness, an enlightened consciousness that says, you do not need to obey this any longer. Do not worry about stealing any longer. Worry about giving. Can you see the difference there? When you do, you will be on your first steps towards enlightenment. Now, that is the literal translation of the story. If you read it literally, that is literally, it is deeper. There's a generational building of these two tribes, of the Essenes that are awaiting Christ to come. They are in there in the Old Testament. But ultimately, this is the story. There's a vengeful, wrathful God that is causing a lot of carnage and hatred and death in the world, and probably starts manipulating the emperors of the world by the time Christ comes, hence Rome and thus forth. And then Christ comes and says, no, no longer. Now, does this really happen in the world? I don't know. You figure that out for yourself. That's not the question. This is what the literal story says, though. And so if you are a believer of Christ and you are a believer of this Bible and you're following the Old Commandments, the 10 Commandments, and you think Abraham was a moral character, or you're believing in kosher law, or you think that you need a priest to reach God, then you're not reading the story right enough. Because Christ said, I'm in you, and I am putting the holy temple in you. So now we get to the parabolic part of the Bible. That's what literally it says. I don't know if that's chronologically what happened in the world. I don't know, okay? But literally that's what the story says. Now, what does the story mean parabolically? Okay, because it means something literally, and that may or may not have actual consequences in this literal world, but obviously it also means something parabolically. And we've been talking about ego up until this point. And ego is Jehovah, or representative of such. And ultimately, you can't have the parabolic story without the literal story. In other words, you can't have Christ's salvation without you walking to it and finding it through you. When Christ goes on the cross, he offers you salvation, but you have to take it. And to take it, that is inside of you. It's pretty clear that is where you go find it. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, that means that you have a Lord in there now called the ego that is blinding you and making you vulnerable, meaning less than what your nature, your truest essence, your spiritual essence should be. The super you, if you will. You are much more powerful than this. You have much more knowledge and wisdom than this, and so do I, but we haven't tapped into it, and we need to, and it is within us, right? But the ego is blinding us, and if we're not vigilant against Jehovah and the ego, then it overcomes our minds, and we live moment by moment and thought by thought like a slave to our mind, rather than being creative beings and putting thoughts out there. Because the world was created by the Word. And if you believe in your Word, and you start understanding what Christ is telling you, and what power he has given you, then you'll start understanding the nature of the story. And when you start understanding the nature of the story, then the story itself, in its literal sense, becomes fulfilled. It's amazing if you think about it. Your personal salvation, your personal self-awareness and attention to Christ within you will lead to the salvation of this entire world.